the final parak of C'iroבין, parak Yud. Hamoiti tefillin machnison zug zug. The first two Mishnayos of this parak deal with a person who finds several pairs of tefillin in an open area such as a field, where they may get ruined by animals or from the weather. So this Mishnah will teach us how he can take them to a safe place through Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos. So if one finds several pairs of tefillin in a field or in another unsafe place, he should bring them in pair by pair. That is, he should wear them one pair at a time the regular way, one tefillin on his arm and one tefillin shal rosh, and bring them to a safe place where he takes them off. He then goes back and repeats this procedure until he has secured all the pairs of tefillin. By wearing them, he does not commit the issur of carrying in Rosh Hashanah because wearing tefillin is like wearing a garment. So machlekes tanoim, whether the mitzvah of tefillin applies on weekdays or on Shabbos as well. The Tanna Kamma of our Mishnah is of the opinion that wearing tefillin is a chiyuv even on Shabbos. According to this, wearing tefillin in Rosh Hashanah is mutter, like wearing a garment. The Chachamim, though, answered wearing tefillin on Shabbos because they were concerned that one of the leather straps might tear, then being unable to wear the tefillin, one might carry them in Rosh Hashanah, which would be awesome. In the case of the Mishnah, where someone found tefillin at risk of getting ruined, the Chachamim lifted their issur and allowed him to wear the tefillin in Rosh Hashanah in order to spare the chilul of the tefillin. Nevertheless, he may wear only one pair of tefillin at a time, even though there's room on the head and arm for two pairs of tefillin. He may not wear two pairs of tefillin on a day when the mitzvah applies, which includes Shabbos according to the Tanna Kamma. It's asur by the Torah because of Baal Taisa. Furthermore, since one is asur to wear a second pair of tefillin, they are considered a masui, so wearing them in Rosh Hashanah would be asur min Torah because it's not considered a garment, it's going to be considered a masui. Rabbi Gamliel says he may bring them in two by two. He may wear two pairs of tefillin at a time. Two shal roishes and two shal yads, because even wearing two pairs is not considered carrying. Rabbi Gamliel holds that it's a tashlit, it's not a problem. What are we talking about? When is one allowed to bring tefillin to a safe place? Either one or two pairs of tefillin at a time through Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos, be a shanos. In the case of old ones which have markings to show that they're actually tefillin. But in the case of new ones which do not have such markings and may not even be tefillin, so Potter, one is exempt, one should not save them by wearing them in a Rosh Hashanah. If the tefillin are old, and even if its straps are untied, the markings left by the knots are discernible. These markings prove that they are indeed tefillin, but if the tefillin are new, there's no real way to tell whether they're real tefillin or some other kind of kameya. Since they may not be tefillin, wearing them in Rosh Hashanah is going to be asur. Now, although a kameya we discussed in Sech Shabbos Parag Vav, even a kameya that has the same content as tefillin is not kodesh because it wasn't made l'shem tefillin. Motzon tzvasam krichos. The Mishnah considers the halacha in a situation where there's so many pairs of tefillin that even if we'll go back and forth wearing one or two pairs at a time, we'll not be able to save all of them before the end of Shabbos. So if one found them tied in numerous pairs or in large bundles, and there are too many of them to secure them all before Shabbos is over, machshech aleim umeviyah. He should stay with them, guarding them until nightfall, and then bring them into a safe place. If there were so many tefillin that he doesn't have enough time to save them all by going back and forth, wearing one or two pairs at a time before the end of Shabbos, he will have to return to their location after Shabbos in any event. Since he will have to go back anyways, the Chachamim did not waive the issur against wearing tefillin, but instead were mechayiv him to watch the tefillin until nightfall and then carry them all to safety. Ubesakona, however, if by wearing tefillin or staying with the tefillin he puts himself in danger, so the mechasam v'hoylech should just cover them and leave. The danger spoken here is that the government at the time, Asur, did not allow the Yidden to practice Yiddishkeit and would punish anybody found with tefillin. In that case, the only option is to cover the tefillin and leave. But if the danger is that he might be attacked by Ganovim, by Listim, he's not allowed to abandon the tefillin because he has another means by which he can save them before nightfall, namely that he carries many pairs less than Daled Amos for Rosh Hashanah. In this way, he doesn't commit the issur of carrying Daled Amos for Rosh Hashanah. Although this method of carrying is asur mit Rabbanon, the Chachamim lifted this issur for the sake of protecting the tefillin. Mishnah Beis. Reb Shimon says, "Noisan lachavera v'chavera lachavera ad shemagia lachotzer achitzayna." The end of the last Mishnah, we learned that if the person found tefillin is afraid that he'll be attacked by thieves, he doesn't need to stay with them, but he may carry them less than Daled Amos at a time. Now there's a different shita in the Mishnah. What's that shita? Reb Shimon says, "Noisan lachavera," instead of carrying them less than 4 amos at a time, you should give them to a friend who is standing within 4 amos to him, and his friend should give them to his friend who is standing within 4 amos to him, and so on, until the last one reaches the outermost chutzner of the city, where the tefillin can then be left in safety. V'chein b'noi. Similarly, if one's child is born in the field on Shabbos, it must be brought to a place where it can be taken care of. Nice and lachavere, he could give the infant to his friend. And his friend could give the infant to his friend, and so on, even if the infant will have to be handled by 100 people, which may be very uncomfortable, especially for this child. This method is preferable to having just one person carrying the baby all the way, less than 4 amos at a time. According to the previous Tana, passing an item from one person to another that's within 4 amos of the other one is mutter only for a mitzvah such as protecting the kedusha of tefillin or protecting the health and the well-being of a baby. But Rabbi Yehuda says it applies in other situations as well. Even if a person found an ownerless barrel in a Rishus Rabbim, he may give the barrel to his friend, and his friend to his friend, and so on. Afilu chutz l'tchum. It may be transported in this manner even outside the tchum, which is more than 2,000 amos away from where it was found. Amar Loida Chacham said to Rabbi Yehuda, Loita halach zu yosem miragli baileha. This barrel may not go further than the feet of its owner, which means to say the barrel must be treated as though it has an owner. Just as an owned barrel is confined to the tchum of the owner, so is this ownerless barrel confined to a tchum of the place where it was found. Therefore, it may not be taken more than 2,000 amos away from the place where it was found. Fine. Mishnah Gimel. Somebody was reading a sefer, a scroll of Kisei HaKodesh while sitting on a porch. That's a Carmelist. So Nizgalgal HaSefer Miyodai, and one end of the scroll rolled out of his hand and landed on the ground in Rishus Rabbim. He may roll it in towards himself. Although it's also midrabanan to transfer an object from a Rishus Rabbim to a Carmelist, even in this case, where the person who's reading from the Megillah, from the Sefer, is holding one end of the Sefer and the Carmelist, the Chachamim lifted their Isser so that the scroll will not be left in Derech Bezayin, because there's a halacha by being mechabed, giving cover to Svarim properly. He was reading the Sefer when he was sitting on the roof, which is Rishus HaYochid, and one end of the Sefer rolled out of his hand. So the halacha is like this: before it lands within 10 tvachim of the ground of the Rishus HaRabbim, he can still roll it towards himself. Once it comes within 10 tvachim of the ground, he may not roll it in. Rather, he should turn it over onto its writing and leave it that way. Rishus HaRabbim extends, what's the svar over here? Rishus HaRabbim extends only 10 tvachim upwards. The space above that is a makom tur, for which it's mutter to carry into any type of rishus. Therefore, as long as the end of the sefer is more than 10 tvachim above the ground, he may bring it back to the rooftop, which is Rishus HaYochid. Once it goes below 10 tvachim and enters into the Rishus HaRabbim, bringing it back is also, although this is not an Issa D'Oraisa, because he's already holding on to the other end of the sefer, because it's so close to an Issa D'Oraisa, it's not even mutter, even for the sake of protecting and giving cover to the Kisvei HaKodesh. This Isser against rolling in the end of the sefer from within 10 tvachim of the ground applies only if it has come to rest on some surface. If it's dangling in the air and not resting on a surface, the person who's reading is allowed to roll it in no matter how close it is to the ground of the Rishus HaRabbim. And the Mishnah will continue with this halacha. Rav Yehuda says, "Afilu ein masulukum min haaretz elukum lemachat." Even if it's removed from the ground, meaning the distance between this Megillah, this klaf, is removed from the ground by only the width of a needle, meaning suspended in the air just a tiny distance from the ground, he may roll it in towards himself. Since it's not resting on a surface, bringing it back to the Rishus HaYochid is mutter. Rabbi Shimon Aimer, afilu ba'aretz atzmai gadolay atzloi, she'en l'chadav mishum shvus oimed b'fnei kisvei HaKodesh. According to the Talmud and Kamen Rabbi Yehuda, once the dropped end lands on a surface within 10 tvachim of the ground, it may not be rolled back up into Rishus HaYochid. Although the issue is only midrabanan, because the person reading it is already holding the other end in a Rishus HaYochid, we don't waive this issue for the sake of Kisvei HaKodesh. But Rav Shimon disagrees. Rav Shimon says, "Afilu ba'aretz atzmai," even if the scroll is on the ground itself, he may still roll it in towards himself. Because nothing is nothing is asur midrabanan, which stands in the way of protecting the kedusha of Kisvei HaKodesh. According to Reb Shimon, even the more severe type of Issur Rabbanon that we mentioned earlier in the Mishnah, we waive it for the sake of sparing a scroll of Kisvei HaKodesh from being mutal b'bizoyim. That's what Reb Shimon holds. The question is if this applies elsewhere also, but it sounds like Reb Shimon is more or less saying a general rule, whatever shvus it would be. Fine. Mishnah Daled. Ziz shalifnei hachaloim. There's a ledge in front of a window, and it juts out more than 10 tvachim above the ground of the Rishus HaRabim. Noitan alav noitan lemenu b'Shabbos. The people in the house may put objects on it and take objects from it on Shabbos. A person may stand in Rishus HaYochid and move objects into a Rishus HaRabim. Rishus HaRabim and Tal Rishus HaYochid. A person could stand in Rishus HaRabim and move items that are in a Rishus HaYochid. Oimed Odom Rishus HaYochid Metatl Rishus HaRabim. Rishus HaRabim Metatl Rishus HaYochid. Ulevad Shal HaYotzi Chutz Me'arba Amos. A person may stand in a Rishus HaYochid and move items that are in Rishus HaRabim. And also, a person may stand in a Rishus HaRabim and move items that are in a Rishus HaYochid. However, in the first case, when he stands in a Rishus HaYochid and moves items in a Rishus HaRabim, it's permitted only if he doesn't take them beyond Daled Amos. And he may not move an object more than Daled Amos from its original place, because doing so is a Melocha Deraisa. Mishnah Hey. Lo Yamoid Odom Rishus HaYochid v'Yashtem Rishus HaRabim. A person may not stand in a private rishus and urinate into a public rishus. Rishus HaRabim Yashtem Rishus HaYochid. Or stand in a public rishus and urinate into a private rishus, because by doing so, he transfers the urine from one domain to another, from one rishus to another. Now, while urine is within the body, it's considered to be a rest in the rishus where the person is standing. But when a person lets it out of his body, so then he's going to be over this deraisa of being mavir from rishus to rishus. Similarly, one may not spit from one rishus to another. Rabbi Yehuda says, also, when once saliva becomes detached in his mouth, has collected in his mouth at a point where it's ready to be spit out, or he has something in there that he needs to spit out, he may not walk Daled Amos in the Rishus HaRabim until he spits it out, since it's ready to be expelled from his mouth. It's no longer considered part of the body, but it's something that he's carrying in his mouth. Mishnah Vav. Lo yamed odom Rishus HaYochid v'yishta Rishus HaRabim. A person may not stand in Rishus HaYochid and lean forward to drink from a cup or a pitcher that's in a Rishus HaRabim, or Rishus HaRabim v'yishta Rishus HaYochid, or stand in a Rishus HaRabim and lean forward to drink from a cup or a pitcher that's in a Rishus HaYochid, because maybe he'll unthinkingly bring the keli back into the Rishus where he's standing and be over on being mavir Rishus to Rishus. Elam ken hichnis reisha v'ruba l'makom shosheisa. This is also unless he brings his head and the majority of his body into the Rishus in which he is drinking, in which case the Chachamim were not concerned that he will transfer the cup from one Rishus to another. V'chein begas. The same halacha applies to a wine press in regards to Hilchos Meiser. Grapes that have been gathered but not fully processed into wine do not yet need to have Meiser separated from them. Although the Rabbanan answered eating or drinking from the grapes or the juice before taking Meiser of them, they were matir achilas arai from them, meaning snacking from them, until the wine has been fully processed, which is then mechuyev in Meiser. For this reason, when grapes are being made into wine, one may take a drink from the juice in the upper vat of the wine press, even though Meiser was not separated from the grapes before they were pressed. The Mishnah teaches that even drinking from the upper vat is mutter only when one is standing with his head and the majority of his body over the vat. If not, then drinking is usher, because we're concerned that he might bring the wine from the vat to where most of his body is located, which is next to the vat. Drinking next to the vat, not over it, is usher because it's considered more of an achilas keva than achilas arai. A person may stand in Rishus HaRabim and catch water falling from a roof gutter within 10 tvachim of the ground. Since the water he is catching is already located in the airspace of the Rishus HaRabim, no change of Rishus takes place when he catches it. However, one may not press his lips or a cup against the end of the gutter in order to receive the water directly from it. This is because the gutter is seen as an extension of the roof, which is the Rishus HaYochid. So receiving the water directly from it while standing in Rishus HaRabim is considered havara merishus l'rishus. However, one may drink in any manner from a drain pipe that juts out from a wall of a house. That is, he may even press his lips or a container to the end of a drain pipe and receive the water directly from it. What's the difference? Since the open end of such a pipe typically juts out some distance from the wall of the house, the drain pipe is not seen as an extension of the roof, and collecting water in this manner is not usher. In this case, the roof of the house slopes, so that all the water flows to one spot. At this spot, a hole is made in the area surrounding the roof, into which a pipe is inserted. This pipe runs down the wall and extends out from the house, so that the water falls away from the wall of the house. This pipe typically extends out more than 3 tachim from the roof, so it doesn't have the same din as a Rishus HaYochid, and being that it's so small, it's not Chaylik Rishus La'atzmai, like the Gemara explains. Mishnah Zayin. Bar Rishus Rabim. There's a pit of water in Rishus Rabim, V'chil Yosei Govay Asar Tvachim, and the pile of earth that's surrounding the bar is 10 tvachim high. Chaloin Sha'al Gabav, and there's a window in the house that overlooks this pit. You may draw water from the pit into the house on Shabbos. That is, one may draw water from the pit, which is a Rishus HaYochid, into the house, which is also a Rishus HaYochid, even though the water will be transported through the Rishus HaRabim that's between the pit and the house. This is mutter because when one draws water from the pit, he must raise it higher than 10 tvachim in order to bring it over the chulyasoi of the bar. It thus travels through an airspace at 10 tvachim above the ground of the Rishus HaRabim, which is a Makom P'tor. Since he is taking the water from one Rishus HaYochid to another Rishus HaYochid, it's mutter to transfer it this way. Ashba b'Rishus HaRabim Gavay Asar Tvachim. Similarly, if there's a pile of trash or garbage in Rishus HaRabim and it's 10 tvachim high, which is the minimum height of Rishus HaYochid, you may pour water out onto it on Shabbos from a window that is above it. Here too, transferring the water is mutter because it goes from one private rishus to another private rishus, meaning from the house to the garbage dump, through the airspace that's more than 10 tvachim above the Rishus HaRabim, which is a Makom P'tor. Mishnah Ches. Ilon shu mesach ala oretz. The halacha is that a tree that forms a covering over the ground, meaning the branches stick out from all sides of the trunk at a height of at least 10 tvachim above the ground, and slope downwards, enclosing the area around the trunk. If the end of its branches are not higher than 3 tvachim above the ground, they are within 3 tvachim of the ground, you may carry beneath the branches because they're considered mechitza that convert the area they enclose into a Rishus HaYochid. If the roots protrude from the earth to a height of 3 tvachim above the ground, one may not sit on them on Shabbos, because midrabanon it's also to use a tree on Shabbos. The Chachamim asked using a tree on Shabbos by climbing on it, or placing items on it, or even leaning on it to prevent people from violating the Malacha Deraisa of Kaitzer. If the shurashim, the roots, stick out from the ground and reach a height of at least 3 tvachim, they too are considered trees and may not be used on Shabbos. But if they're lower than 3 tvachim, they are regarded as part of the ground. Hadeles sheba muktzah v'chadokim sheba pirtu machzolos. The Mishnah is going to go on to different halachas that concern the use of doors on Shabbos. The first halacha regards a door that's not attached to the building with hinges. It's simply jammed into a doorway. So in order to open the door, you have to remove it entirely and put it down. So hadeles sheba muktzah v'chadokim sheba pirtu machzolos ein noilim behem elim ken gavoy min ha'oretz. The halacha of a door to a backyard and a bundle of thorns that's used as a door and a gap in a wall, and reed mats that are used as doors, basically you have an open area and you just stuff this thing in. You may not close the door with them on Shabbos because pushing them into place resembles the malacha of boina. The use is forbidden unless they dangle above the ground and not in use. For example, they are tied with a rope that keeps them from touching the ground. Since they're suspended above the ground, they're clearly attached to the doorway and appears to be designated for the door, the use as a door. So as in the case with regular doors, closing the doorway with them does not resemble building and is therefore mutter. Mishnah Tes. Earlier in Mishnah Daled we learned that Chachamim taught that a person standing in Rishus HaYochid is allowed to move an object in Rishus HaRabim, and a person standing in Rishus HaRabim is allowed to move something that's in Rishus HaYochid. We're going to go back to that, and we're going to see that not everyone agrees to that. Lo yamid adam rishus hayachid v'yiftach b'rishus harabim. A person may not stand in Rishus hayachid, pick up a key lying in Rishus harabim and use it to open a door in a Rishus harabim, because he might bring the key into the Rishus hayachid. The same halacha would apply to Rishus harabim v'yiftach b'rishus hayachid. Likewise, a person may not stand in a public Rishus, pick up a key lying in a private Rishus, and use it to open a door in the Rishus hayachid, because he might inadvertently, which means b'shaygeg, bring the key into the Rishus harabim. Elam ken asa mechitza gavai asar tvachim. In the second case, this is usher unless he built a wall 10 tvachim high before Shabbos to convert the area of the Rishus harabim in which he's standing into another Rishus hayachid. He may then use the key since he too is in a private Rishus, a Rishus hayachid divrei Reb Meir. These are the words of Reb Meir. In the previous cases, Reb Meir mentioned only Rishus hayachids and Rishus harabims, where the concern is that the person may violate the Isur Deraisa of transferring a key from a Rishus harabim to Rishus hayachid or Rishus hayachid to Rishus harabim. Nevertheless, Reb Meir holds the same way, even where one of the Rishuyos that we're dealing with is a Carmelis, which means that a person may not stand in the Carmelis and use a key in a Rishus harabim or Rishus hayachid, or stand in a Rishus hayachid or Rishus harabim and use the key in a Carmelis, because one might transfer the key into or out of the Carmelis. This is usher even though the Isser of carrying an object into or out of a Carmelis is only midrabanan. Now, the Chachamim are not going to like this and they're going to disagree. There was this practice that the butcher's market in Yerushalayim, which was similar to a Carmelis. Yerushalayim was surrounded by walls and its gates were closed at night, therefore the streets were not a Rishus harabim. In fact, every street was a Rishus hayachid, since it was within the walls of the city. Nevertheless, according to the Dinim D'Rabbanan, carrying in or out of the streets of Yerushalayim was usher, because the Ruvei Chatzeros and Shtufei Mavois were not made to be matter carrying in all the city. So because it is, the streets were a Carmelis, which was also usher D'Rabbanan. And when standing in the market, which was a Carmelis, they would lock their booths, which is a Makam Pator, and put the key on a windowsill above the door, which would be a Rishus hayachid. This shows that one may stand in a Carmelis and move a key in a private Rishus, which contradicts the view of Reb Meir. So it seemingly there was a mice about Shuk Shel Patamin that they would do like the Chachamim. Rabbi Yossi says Shuk Shel Tzamar Maya took place in the wool merchant's market, not in the butcher's market. And Rabbi Yossi agrees in the Machlekes, he agrees with the Chachamim against Reb Meir. He's chaylik only where the practice occurred. Now, what's a nafkamina? L'chayra, because when somebody's bringing a meiser rav, you have to be medayik in exactly why it's mutter in this case and why it's also in a different case. And that's what Shimush Chachamim is all about, to be able to know how to differentiate. Yeah? Mishnah Yud. Nagor sheyesh b'roisha glustera. The Mishnah continues with the halachas that relates to locking a door on Shabbos. One way to lock a door is to take a bolt and insert it into a hole that's next to the door, either in the threshold or in the wall. In certain circumstances, this is usher on Shabbos, because when one places it in the hole, he's being meisiv to the binyan of the house, which is usher as a form of baina. However, one may use a knife or a fork as a bolt, a keli. Since the utensil is not typically used for a binyan, using it as a bolt is clearly not baina, and it's only going to be there for aray, temporarily. So it's not going to be considered baina. So nagar sheyesh b'roisha glustera, a door bolt that has a round knob at its end, which makes it fit for pounding spices. Rebbe Lezer also is using it as a bolt, because although it can be used as a utensil to pound spices, one may not insert it into the threshold or the wall of a house, because it appears he's making an addition to the house, which would be the Isra of Binyan. Rav Yossi matir. Rav Yossi permits it, since it's a utensil of sorts. When he uses it as a bolt, it doesn't even appear to be building. Amar Rebbe Lezer says, Ma'isa b'knesset shebeTveria sheyunoyegim by. Heter, it happened that there was a bolt with a knob on its end in a shul in Tveria, and the people there held that it was mutter. Ad Shabbat, meaning that they would use it on Shabbos to lock the door. Is the first Shabbos lock, the original Shabbos lock. Ad Shabbat Gamliel v'azkenim v'ashu lahen. Turam Gamliel came with the Zkenim and asked them to do this. So we see that using such a bolt is asur. Now, the reason why we call combination locks Shabbos locks is because you don't have to carry a key for that. And it used to be that all the other locks were you have to carry a key. So people would have tie clips or clip it onto their jacket in some oifen, or clip it onto their belt if you were that type. but or you would leave your door open, or you would leave your door closed, or hide the key under a mat. And that's why these locks that many people use are called Shabbos locks, not to be confused with Shabbos clocks, which is a whole separate issue, which we're not going to get into now. Rabbi Yossi says that the opposite occurred. Isser Naguba. They treated it as usr. They were not used to lock they were not use this bolt to lock the door. Baram Gamliel v'azkenim v'tiru lahen. Ram Gamliel came with the zikenim and mamatad them to use it. So we have Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yossi arguing about what the story was, and in the previous mission also we have Reb Meir, the Chachamim, and Rabbi Yossi arguing. Again, Rabbi Yossi comes to handle the details of the story. Mishnah Yud Aleph. Nagar hanigrar noilam by mikdash avaloi by Madina. If a plain bolt which lacks a knob, doesn't have a knob on it, is tied to a door with a rope, but the rope is so long that the bolt drags on the ground when not in use, so noilam by mikdash, you may lock the door with it in the Beis Hamikdash avaloi by Madina, but not in the rest of the country, anywhere outside the Beis Hamikdash. Since the bolt drags on the ground, not everyone will notice that it's already attached to the door, so it may look like boina. The Chachamim therefore asked one to lock a door with it on Shabbos because one seems to be adding something new to the structure. Nevertheless, it's mutter in the Mikdash because, like many other shvusim and gzeris rabbanon pertaining to Shabbos, does not apply in the Beis Hamikdash. However, if the bolt is not tied to the door but just rests on the ground, it's forbidden both here and here. What does that mean? Kan v'kan? In the Beis Hamikdash and outside the Beis Hamikdash. In this case, where the bolt is not attached to the door at all, its use is an Isser Deraisa of Boina. It's also Mishum Boina. So therefore, one may not lock a door with it in the Beis Hamikdash. If the bolt rests on the ground, and it's not tied to the door, it's also Midrabanon. And if it's also Midrabanon, then it's mutter in the Mikdash, but not anywhere else. But if it drags on the ground, it's tied to the door, but all or part of it touches the ground, it's mutter in the rest of the country, even outside the Beis Hamikdash. Mishnah Yud Beis. The Mishnah presents another Siddur Rabbanon that does not apply in the Beis Hamikdash. It involves the door of a closet or some other cabinet that's held in place with two pegs, one attached to the bottom of the door and one attached to the top. These pegs fit into corresponding holes into the closet itself above and below the door. The pegs swivel in their holes, allowing the door to swing open and closed. The Mishnah discusses whether a peg that came out of its hole may be put back on Shabbos. So we may put the bottom peg of a closet door back into its hole in the Mikdash, avaloi ba Medina, but not outside the Beis Hamikdash. If the bottom peg comes out of its hole, but the top peg remains in place, the door will not fall down completely, and putting it back in place is quite easy. Therefore, this is not an Isser Deraisa. Because of Baina, it's also only Midrabanon, and therefore mutter in the Beis Hamikdash. However, it's also to put back the upper peg, both here in the Mikdash and outside the Beis Hamikdash in the Medina. If the upper peg comes out of its hole, the door will fall down. Since in this case you're really attaching the door back to the closet, so then that's real Baina, which is also even in the Beis Hamikdash. Rabbi Yehuda says the Elyon b'Mikdash v'tachta b'Medina. The upper peg may be put back in its hole in the Beis Hamikdash, but not elsewhere. Although the doors were reattaching the door, it's not awesome and not Torah, because the malacha of building does not apply to freestanding structures such as a closet. The malacha of bain is only for buildings. Nevertheless, it's awesome and Rabbanon, and as such, it's mutter only in the Beis Hamikdash. V'tachta b'Medina, and the lower peg may be put back on its hole even in the rest of the country, because this is mutter even according to the Rabbanon. Mishnah Yud Gimel. Machzirin Ritia Bamikdash. You may put a dressing back onto a wound in the temple. What if Smain does? A Ritia is a cloth that they were tied to the band-aid. Avlei Medina, but not in the rest of the country. It's asam Rabbanon to apply a bandage with ointment to a wound on Shabbos because one may be doing memachik. Nevertheless, a kohen who had removed a ritia, a bandage, from his hand in order to do the malacha, is allowed to put it back on his hand. But instead of putting it back, he wants to put the bandage on the wound for the first time. It's also here and here, meaning here in the Beis Hamikdash and outside the Beis Hamikdash. Kaishrin Nima Bamikdash. You may tie the snapped string of a musical instrument in the Beis Hamikdash. Avalei B'Medina, but not in the rest of Eretz Yisrael. It's also b'drabanan to tie the two ends of snap string together on Shabbos, even if it's not going to be a kesher shel kayama, because one might come to make a kesher shel kayama, which is also minat Torah because of kosher. Nevertheless, if the string of a musical instrument that's used in the Beis Hamikdash snapped or ripped, one may tie the two ends together with a temporary knot that can be played during the shira in the Beis Hamikdash. When the wine was poured on the mizbeach during the Tamid Shel Shachar, the Carbon Tamid, the Leviim sang and played musical instruments. If a string of one of the musical instruments broke on Shabbos, it may be repaired by tying the broken ends together with a temporary knot, since the repair is needed for the carbonas that they were bringing. I guess that means that they would be playing the music on Shabbos. In Batchila kan vekan also, but if instead of repairing a broken string, one wants to attach a string to the instrument Chatchila, it's aser sai in the Beis Hamikdash and sai b'Medina. So that's going to be malach of kosher regardless. You may cut off a wart by hand from an animal in the Beis Hamikdash, but not in the rest of Eretz Yisrael. It's also midrabanan to remove a wart by hand, because one might come to do so with a tool, which would be malacha of goizes. Nevertheless, it's mutter to remove a wart from an animal so that it can be brought as a carbon in the Beis Hamikdash. But if instead of removing it by hand, one wishes to cut it off with a keli, it's usher in the Beis Hamikdash and outside the Beis Hamikdash, because cutting off a wart with a tool, with a keli, would be an Isser Deraisa. Mishnah Yudalit. Kohen shaloka be'etzboi korech alav gemi b'mikdash. A kohen who has a wound on his finger may wrap a reed around it in the Beis Hamikdash, avalei b'Medina, not in the rest of Eretz Yisrael. It's also midrabanan to wrap a reed around the wound on Shabbos, because the reed helps heal the wound, and healing procedures are also midrabanan. Gzeira shem yischak samamonim, a tolda of grinding teichen. Nevertheless, if a kohen is serving in the Beis Hamikdash and has a wound that doesn't look pleasant, and people are going to look at it and it's not nice, so he wants to cover it up, so he may cover it with a reed. This is, it's for the avodah. But if he ties a reed tightly around the wound in order to draw blood from it, this is asur either way, because it's an Isser Deraisa, which is asur even in the Beis Hamikdash. It's told of Sheichet. Nocha case, Boizkin Melech al Gabe Kebesh B'Shul Shleach. You may crush salt and scatter it on the ramp leading to the Mizbeach, so that the Kehanim don't slip as they walk up and down the ramp of the Mizbeach. Although this is also midrabanan because it resembles boina, it's mutter on in the Beis Hamikdash. If clumps of salt had already been crushed, then salt stuck together again, one might crush the new clumps. However, crushing clumps of salt lechatchila is a malacha of teichen, and that would be a malacha of teichen deraisa, and that would be also even in the Beis Hamikdash. And the reason why it's boina is because spreading salt on the surface resembles boina because it improves the surface by making it less slippery. Another case that the Mishnah talks about is you may draw water with a bucket tied to a wheel from the exile's well and the great well. What is this? It was different types of. There were two wells that were in the Azara, that were in the Lishkos in the Azara, which were located in the premises of the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos. This too is also asur midrabanan, but was mutter in the Mikdash. The Chacham were concerned that since it's easy to draw water from a well by a wheel, one may draw water to water his garden, which would be asur because of Zereya. And the Isra applies only to wells that are near a garden or some other area that would make things grow. Umebe'er hakar b'yontif. And you may draw water with a bucket tied to a wheel from the bar hakar, or hoker, which is the well of the source, they translate over here, because it was fed by a spring. It was the source from which people accessed the spring's water. On Yantif, even though that well is not in the Beis Hamikdash, those who lived in the Chutz La'aretz traveled to Yerushalayim for Yantif, and they needed to drink water, not Chutz La'aretz, but people traveled from around. Just to read the Lashon of the Rav. Al Shem Shahaya Be'er Mayim Chayim, Karula Bar Hakar, Lashon Mekar. It was a source of water. Be'er Mayim Chayim is an independent source of water. And as we mentioned earlier in the Masechta, the people traveling always needed water. So the people that were traveling to the Beis HaMikdash for Oile Regel, they had to bring, they had to drink. V'tiru lahem neviim shebeneim Chagai Zachar Malachi Lamalis Menu V'Galgal Beregel. Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, which had neviim like Chagai Zachar Malachi, were matir on Yantif that these people can use this well to schlep up water with it on Yantif. Nisha be'teroi she'memalim imenu b'Yantif begalgal af b'Medina masha ein kein b'shar be'eretz hanoivim. This heter to draw water on Yantif in a well that uses a wheel is mutter even anywhere. There's no isser on this anywhere on Yantif. Masha ein kein b'shar be'eretz hanoivim, but no other live. Just because it's alive, it doesn't make it a heter. But because there's a galgal, that's what makes it mutter. Fine. Mishnah Tez Vov. Sheret shenimtza b'mikdash kohen meitzia behem yonosh leil hashes esatuma. The Mishnah brings one more Issa D'Rabbanon that's mutter in the mikdash. It concerns the sheret, any one of the Shemona Shratim which you mentioned in Shabbos, that the nevela is tameh and transmits tumah to people or objects with which they come into contact. If a dead sheret is found in the mikdash, it must be removed because nothing tameh may be brought into the Beis HaMikdash or allowed to remain there. A tameh person is zichar not allowed in the Beis HaMikdash. If he does, he must be sent out. Similarly, a dead sheret will not be brought into the mikdash, and once it's there, it must be removed. So, sheret shenimtza b'mikdash kohen meitzia b'hem yonoi. If a dead sheret is found in the Beis HaMikdash, kohen may remove it with his belt on Shabbos, even though it's muktzah, and it may not be moved in any place outside the Beis HaMikdash. Why? So as not to keep the tumah in the Beis HaMikdash longer than necessary. Since there's a chiyuv to remove tumah from the Beis HaMikdash, the sharets must be taken out immediately. The kohen is therefore obligated to pick it up right away with his belt, even though the belt will become tameh. He can't, even to find the keli to pick it up to remove it, he just needs to scoop it up and take it. Divrei Rabbi Yochanan ben Breka. As says Dr. Rabbi Yochanan ben Breka, Rabbi says, "B'tzvas shel eitz shelei l'Rabbi says atuma." He should pick up the sharets with wooden tongues, which cannot become tameh, since it's pshutikli eitz, and not with his belt. Shelei l'Rabbi says atuma, says not to increase tumah in the mikdash. Although it may take some time to find this tzvas shel eitz, these wooden tongues, and in the meantime there'll be tumah floating around in the mikdash, it's preferable to pick it up with his belt and increasing the tumah even for a short amount of time. So now, the tumah is, in this, the Maharsha speaks out that this machlekes applies during the week also. It's mentioned in the context of Shabbos to teach that muktzah is, in order to remove tumah from the Beis HaMikdash, we're being deichel the isra of muktzah. But the Mikud is like this, because on the one hand, you're keeping the tumah there longer, but on the other hand, you're maybe making other things tameh. So what do what's better? I said, from where in the Beis HaMikdash do we remove it, despite it being muktzah? You may remove it from the heichel and the ulam, which was the room that was before the heichel, and from the section of the chatzah between the heichel and the mizbeach, which are ben ulam la mizbeach. The Mishnah speaks out in the beginning of Kalim that is a very, that has a special kedusha even more than the rest of the Azara. Divrei Reb Shimon ben Anas, these are the words of Reb Shimon ben Anas. Reb Shimon ben Anas holds that although the Torah requires that a sheretz be removed from the Beis HaMikdash, the obligation to remove it immediately is not so strong that it overrides the other Isurim, and this would include the Isra of Muktzah. Therefore, if a sheretz is found in the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos, must be left there until after Shabbos. However, if it's found in the Heichal or in the Ben Ulam Lamizbeach, it should be removed immediately since these places are closer to the Shechina. Rabbi Kiva says, "Mokum shechayovin al zdaine kares or shegigosei chatos misham ma'itzian oisei." We remove it from any place that a tamei person is going to be chayiv kares for entering b'mezid, and would be chayiv to bring a chatos if he entered b'shogeg. The Torah, again, we mentioned earlier that the Torah asks a tamei person to enter into the Kedesh HaKadosh, to the Mikdash, whether it's the Heichel, the Ulam, or any part of the Azara. If he does so with the awareness that he's doing an Aveira, so that's b'mezid, he's chayiv kares. If he does so when he's unaware that he's doing something wrong, he is doing it b'shegeg, and he must bring a korban chatas. So these places include the Heichal, the Ulam, and the entire Azara, even beyond the Mizbeach. So if a dead sheretz is found anywhere in the Chotzer on Shabbos, the Azara on Shabbos, it must be removed. And only if it's found outside the Azara could it be left in a place until after Shabbos. V'shar kol ha'makaymes kaifin alav psachter. The Mishnah now teaches what should be done if a dead sheretz is found on Shabbos in a place from where it cannot be removed. Beyond the Mizbeach according to Shemenanas, or outside the Azara according to Rekiva. If a sheretz is found in any other place in the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos, kaifin alav psachter, we cover it with a big pot and leave it there till after Shabbos. I guess if you see a pot sitting upside down in the Beis HaMikdash, there's something under that, and they don't want you to turn it over because you will become, there's tum under there, and that's how you're dealing with the tum. What's the psach there? Is the the Rab says is a sir shal nechayshas, a copper pot. Targum shal siroisav psach tarvosei. The targum of the word siroisav is psach tarvosei. So the psach there is the word. It's made up of two words, pas and keser. Interesting. I don't know the meaning of this. Reb Shimon Aimer, Malkim Sheitiu L'cha Chachamim Mishalcha Nosnu Loch. Shelehitiu L'cha Ela Mishum Shvus. The Mishnah concludes with a statement that refers back to Mishnah Yud Gimel, which we learned that if a string of a musical instrument used in the Beis HaMikdash broke on Shabbos, you may tie the ends together with a kesher that's not shel kayama. Reb Shimon's chaylik, and asers even a kesher that's not shel kayama because it may lead to a person making a kesher shel kayama, which would be aser deraisa. Reb Shimon says you can tie it with a bow, which if you pull it, it will get undone, as we spoke in Masechta Shabbos. Although in that case Reb Shimon took Reb Shimon's machmer, in Perik Daled he was makel. The Tanakama in Perik Daled Mishnah Yud Aleph says that if when Shabbos begins, a person just one amma outside the line that marks the tchum of his town, he may not walk more than 2,000 ammas from his current position. Reb Shimon though says that he's provided with 15 ammas within the line. He may walk anywhere within the tchum of his town. Reb Shimon proceeds here to explain why he rules strictly in one case and he was mekel in the other. Reb Shimon in the place where you're allowed to walk anywhere within the tchum of the town, they're giving you what is yours. That is, even if a person is 15 amas outside the boundary when Shabbos began, he may go anywhere within the town's tchum because the markers for town's tchum are usually placed 15 amas closer to the town than the true boundary, so that people shouldn't. I mean, they did that as a chumrah, so people should be machmer to get people not to go out of the tchum. So although he's 15 amas beyond the markers, he's still within the tchum. It's not a kula. It simply reflects the reality of the situation. This case is not comparable to that of a broken string, where it is appropriate to be machmer. Because the Chachamim allowed you to do it in the Beis HaMikdash only which was a mishum shvus and not something that's also. Hence, it's also to tie the broken string of a musical instrument even in the Beis HaMikdash because some knots are also midaraisa. Adkan Perik Yod and Hadar Alachim Sech Erevin Hadrach Alon.